Hello, welcome. I'm Jessica Abel from jessicaabel.com, and this is the first day of Creative Compass. I know that a bunch of people are here, a bunch of people have signed up for this. I'm really excited to get started. And I know that you guys have been thinking about your one goal today. You've been thinking about having one goal. All right, here's the echo about to show up. Hang on a second. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. And mostly I'm going to take questions. Mostly we're going to just talk about what your questions are about your one goal and how to choose one goal. But let's just go into the basic reasons for why to have a one goal, why to have a single goal when you are when you're working on your creative work. Now, you may have other goals for work or for other domains of your life, and that's okay. But if you can stick to one thing in other domains of your life, then you will be in really great shape. Because here's the basic outline of it. Okay, so if you have a list of, I mean, it's not unusual to have 10 or 15 different goals that you want to achieve in your creative life. Maybe you have 2 or 3 or 4 things you're bouncing back and forth between. And realistically, you have say, let's give it 8 hours, an 8-hour day, because that's a work day, spread over the course of a week, in which you can work on these goals. That's all you've got available, is that 8 hours. If you spend like an hour on one project and 2 hours on another project, 3 hours on another project, you're going to push all these things ahead bit by bit. That's true. However, if you focus on one project for 8 hours in a week, you not only get 8 hours of progress done on that project, which is a significant chunk, even if it's spread out over an entire week and you only have half an hour on a certain day, you still have a significant amount in the week. The other advantage of this is that the degree to which you make progress is accelerated quite a bit. You have this really amazing ability to duplicate and build on your progress in focusing on one thing during the course of a week. The reason for that is that, for example, say your one project is to work on a collection of essays, another project is to work on poetry, another project is a drawing project. You have sets of notes and sort of a thinking process that goes into each of those projects, and every single time you pick it up, you have to get back to where you left off. That may mean you have to literally find your notes. You have to literally find your stuff before you can get started. It could be that. It may not mean that you have to literally find your stuff because you know where your stuff is, but you have to kind of like get your mental space back in, and you have to get sort of back in the zone of like a poetry thing versus a drawing thing, for example. So that's where you're weighing these different things, is trying to figure out how you can kind of jump back in. And then, so say you're working on only one project, say you're working on your poetry collection the entire week. Every single time you pick it up, you're more likely to be thinking about it and remembering where you were, where you left off, what was the last that in the time between when you were able to work. So say you have a 45-minute chunk on Monday and you have an hour-and-a-half chunk on Wednesday. All of Tuesday, your mind is processing what you did on Monday. And when you come back on Wednesday, you are full of new ideas about this thing. Whereas if you go on to, say, your essay collection or something like that, or an essay you're writing, you're actually going to have to be kind of storing away those poetry ideas, putting them someplace, hopefully keeping them and not forgetting them, and moving on to remember where you were last week or 2 weeks ago or whatever it was when you last worked on the essay. So this is the value of one goal, is not only the number of hours you put into it, but also the repetitive quality, the commitment to an individual piece of work will deepen and strengthen your work. Okay. One of the things that's really hard about the one goal is that you will hit rough patches in any situation where you're committed to one project for a period of time and you're really committed, you're going to see it all the way through, you're gonna hit rough patches. And I think that the biggest piece of advice I would have about that is simply to recognize that that's the case and to be accepting about it, and to realize that you have to create systems around continuing to work through. And often that system will look like an accountability group. It'll look like people supporting you and trying to help you remember why you're excited about what it is that you're working on. When you're in what I call the dark forest, which is that moment as your project gets more and more complicated and more difficult, and you just feel like your brain can't stretch all the way around it, and you just feel like an idiot and like you can't make it happen. In that moment, people in an accountability group who've been with you since the beginning can look at you and say, like, listen, you are capable of this. You can do this. Remember why this was so exciting? Remember why this was a good idea? Here's why you can do it. And that can help you keep going. And I think that's a really important thing. So Alonso says, my biggest difficulty is maintaining interest when only chipping away 30 minutes a day. The thing I want to do is so big, and thinking about it all day, but only inching forward a tiny bit. I built idea debt faster than progress. That is a really tough question, Alonso. And I mean, I guess the thing that I would suggest most of all is to set milestones for yourself that will mark off chunks of your project, so that you can feel that sense of achievement and finishing that is so hard to achieve when you are in this kind of amorphous place. So what would I say? Like, I don't know what your project is. I don't know what the nature of it is. But, for example, if you're doing a comic, which is, my area of expertise, you're going to have a whole sort of chunk of your project, which is plotting and structuring. And then you're going to have another chunk of your project, which is going to be writing, or possibly you're going to be doing thumbnailing directly, or whatever it is. And when you finish those things, or you finish a chapter or whatever, you have to kind of celebrate and realize that you've reached a big milestone. I think the reason we get tired when we can only work a little bit a day is that it doesn't feel like we're getting anywhere. And so if you really pay attention to where you're getting and like how much is happening, that might really help. I guess the other thing is to attempt to avoid thinking about the whole project, and instead focus again on that next milestone, focus on that next little thing. So you're not always seeing like how far you are from this giant distant goal, but you're actually, quite close to something. I think that might help. Okay, so Lynette says, if you have more time for creative work like a full-time job, do you ever switch between multiple projects? So you meaning, I'm not quite sure on this, but I'm just going to guess, and you can comment on your comment, and maybe, I'll be able to refine this. But basically, I'm thinking what you're talking about here is if your full-time job is a creative job, can you do multiple projects? Yes, I think you can, but I think you have to make sure that you have domains in your life that you're attaching these things to. So, for me, I am a full-time teacher. I'm a professor. And so when I'm working on professor work, I have goals for that work. And when I'm in that mode, I'm thinking about that goal. And then when I'm in my creative mode, I try to have one thing at a time that I'm working on. Of course, I fail. Everybody fails. But I do the best I can, and I'm getting better and better at just having one thing that I'm working on in the creative realm at a time. Ditto with the personal realm. Like, don't try to fix your diet and also your exercise routine at the same time. It's too many things. One thing at a time. So depending on your bandwidth, depending on how many demands there are on you, how many things you need to manage in a given week, you can have up to, say, 3 goals at a time. Just keep them in distinct domains so that you can cordon off that time and say, well, this is the time when I'm doing this. And then your brain can kind of continue to like link those work sessions to one another, if that makes sense. Okay, Will says, can I dedicate more than 30 minutes a day toward the one goal? Absolutely. Yeah, sure. I think recommended sort of depends on how you work, right? And different people work different ways. But basically, if you have the stamina to do it, 90 minutes is often a really good chunk. And you could then take a break and do something else for half an hour and then come back for another 90 minutes. Like 2 90-minute chunks a day is usually where we tap out in terms of creative energy. Now, if you're doing something less, like if you're doing something that's more physical and mechanical, like painting or something like that, and you're not in the thinking process, the planning process, but you're in the execution process, you may be able to work for longer. But if you're writing and really coming up with like intense ideas, 3 hours is probably the limit for most people. I mean, it's pretty much the limit for me. I often work a lot longer, but then I'll try to put more mechanical stuff in parts of the day. But yeah, absolutely. If you have more time, schedule more time. Just make sure you're scheduling out, very like specific chunks of time. Okay, Ivy says, I identified most with the perfectionism problem. I've dived into recording and editing audio for the first time ever and have a lot of imposter syndrome around learning this new skill. I started and installed on my one goal partly for this reason. Any tips on pushing through that anxiety? Yes. The main thing to do is what I was talking about earlier in the reverse kind of, or in a related way, which is break your project down to tiny steps, really tiny steps. Like if you're learning to record and edit audio, I don't know if you're still in the learning process now, or if you've learned that and now you're trying to figure out, whatever. Learning would be, read one article or test out 3 mic setups or whatever, like a thing you can do in 30 minutes. This is where the 30 minutes thing comes from that Will was talking about, I think. Doing something you can do in 30 minutes is really important mentally when you're getting started. And maybe 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. And if you're really, really stuck, make it 1 minute, something you can do, like you can nail it. You can do this for 1 minute. If you can break your tasks down into tiny, tiny steps like that, you can gradually move it back up. It's not like you always have to have like 1 minute increments, or once you're doing 1 minute, you have to stop after 1 minute if you don't feel like stopping. You can keep going, right? But the point is, set goals you can just totally nail, and do your darndest not to think about the big project. Don't think about like, this is the gap. This is Ira Glass's The Gap, right? The gap between where your taste says you should be, the things that you love, and what you're actually doing. That's a huge gap. And so I think it's really important to kind of differentiate those things and separate those things. Okay, so hopefully that helps there. All right, Joy says, how specific does your one goal need to be? I'm working on a theater production, so I tend to need to rely on other people, and have larger, more nebulous goal may be more helpful than producing a single project goal. I actually think what I would say, Joy, is a smaller goal would be more helpful, especially if you're collaborating with other people. Having a highly achievable small goal that is a piece of a larger goal. And this, again, is something we're going to talk about on Sunday during Chart Your Course. Like, how do the smaller pieces fit into the bigger piece? Like, where is this going? So you're in theater, I believe. Yeah, so you're in theater. So, some of the goals that are probably long-term goals for you are enormous. It's a huge production with many, many people in it and many moving parts and all this other stuff. Those are huge. So how can you set the groundwork for that with a goal? And pick that kind of goal. If it's something that has collaborators, that's going to have to play into how this all works. And you need to agree with your collaborators that this is the goal. This is what we're doing right now. We're not doing all the other stuff. We're doing this thing. And then set the steps to move forward. I think the biggest thing that we run into, and this is going to be interesting on Sunday, because we're going to talk about like these big plans, big future, whatever. But then we're going to go back to like, okay, what's the next thing? Like a project that's doable within 6 weeks. That's what we want to look at. And those things are building blocks. It's like Legos, building a whole big structure out of those things. And you have to build them up over time. Okay, Christine says, issues around macro/micro work, when to dive deep into details of writing, editing versus big scale outlining and planning. Well, that's not really a one goal question. I don't think. That's more like a work process thing. And I'm trying to think if we have a lesson on that during Creative Compass. We do talk about that in the Creative Focus workshop, which is coming up really soon. But this is more about rhythms. This is about like, how do you work best? Do you need to alternate these things and go back and forth in order to feel good about your work and feel, excited about what you're doing? Or do you like to work on one thing for a long period of time? This is about listening to yourself and sort of seeing how you work best. I tend to cordon these things off. So like I'll have a period where I'm doing one kind of activity, and then the next period I'll be doing the next kind of activity. But for some people, they want to have things where they can flip back and forth between different sections. Again, to use the comics analogy, there are, sometimes people will have a page that they're going to draw with a bunch of different panels on it. And some people will start at the top and work their way across and down. And some people will start with the really hard stuff and get that out of the way. And some people will start with the really fun stuff and then fill in the rest later. You're going to know, if you really think about it, which, as long as that system functions for you, you should use that system. If it doesn't function for you, then you need to try one of the other two. Either just start at the top and go, start with the easy stuff, or start with the hard stuff. Those are pretty much the three options. Okay, Rebecca says, I just had a baby. I know that you have kids too. How did you figure out how to get on top of your creative schedule again after kids? My baby is 4 months old now and have a few projects I'm considering narrowing in on. When I'm home alone with her often, it feels really difficult to make progress on anything. Oh, I hear you, Rebecca. It is really hard. You will get there, but it is really hard. And especially when you have baby children who are preschool age and no nanny or help or whatever, you're home alone. The number one thing I have to say to you is self-forgiveness. When you miss deadlines or you can't get to the work, you can't focus, forgive yourself. This is a part of your large life rhythm, and this phase will pass, and you will figure it out. This will work. You will figure something out that's going to work. But you're not going to get back. You're not going to have that time again that you've had before, of this kind of like vast amount of open time where you can kind of just decide whatever you want to do. You are subject to the baby's schedule now. And that kind of interruption, the constant interruption that can happen with babies is like, really, really tough. So number one, at 4 months old, the baby's starting to hit a more regular-ish schedule. So you can start to say like, okay, nap time, morning nap time, mid nap time, afternoon, or how many naps they're having, sleep, night sleep, hopefully they're sleeping through the night. This is the time you have. And then you need to schedule your work according to energy level. So like nap times can be interrupted because babies can wake up. So you don't want to get deep into your whatever, for like a 45-minute nap. That just doesn't make any sense. Do email, set up systems, take notes, compile things, like organize stuff, like do things that are going to set you up for success when you do have a chunk of time, which is after the baby goes to sleep. And if the baby's not sleeping through the night, that's project number one, because that's really going to help a lot. And the other thing is you really need to use the one goal system, because trying to do multiple things and take care of the baby is just too much. Like the baby is like 8 projects, and then you need maybe one other project that you can focus on in you time. And of course, as much as possible, get help from your partner, from other people around, and try to balance childcare. Alonso asks for advice on balancing recharging time with productive time. There doesn't seem to be time for both. I already don't watch TV. Alonso, I think my number one tip for you would be time tracking. So get a time tracking calendar, or set up a calendar where basically you write down what you think is going to happen, and then you write down what actually does happen for like a week or 2 weeks, and take a look. Where are you recharging? What are you doing? What's using up your time? And then try to consolidate and reorganize those things, because there may not be anything you can drop at this point. But you may be able to reorganize things in such a way that you're able to use your time a little bit more efficiently, and then you can fit in recharging blocks. It is incredibly important to recharge. I'm so bad at it myself. I mean, I'm so bad at it, but it is really, really important. So I really recommend that you figure this out. And when you're scheduling your week, you need to that needs to go in your calendar before your creative time. Whatever you need as far as recharging needs to actually take place in your calendar before you schedule your creative time, because otherwise you're just going to schedule right over it. We all do. It's just normal. And all that means is you're going to fail yourself. You're going to, collapse of exhaustion or whatever, and, or get sick or whatever it is, or just goof off for an afternoon and watch, TV or video games or whatever, and feel terrible because you didn't allow yourself to do that. If you put it in the calendar, then you know where you're going with it, and then you can focus better on your actual creative time. It's a tough one, though. It may be that you just have more things in your calendar than you're able to functionally do, and then you have to look at what your commitments are and what can you not do. I am going to look at September's question right now. Okay, jumped off Facebook and now I'm here on Crowdcast, that is. Wondering about balancing focus on one thing with the fact that drafting and then putting something aside to percolate before coming back to it makes the end product so much better. I don't think there's a conflict there. Basically, you can have one goal at a time. But if you've drafted something and it needs to percolate for a while, put it in a drawer, have another goal for 3 weeks, however long your percolation period is, and schedule a return to your draft. And just schedule that to come back. And try to make the goal that you're putting in between something you can finish in 3 weeks. That would be awesome. If you can't, you can rotate back to it again after you finish revising your draft. But one of the biggest insights that Connie has had, my student Connie Molina Rojas, who I wrote a post about a couple weeks ago, and I'll be sending that out again soon, is this idea of alternation, because she had all these different goals and she wanted to do them all. She didn't want to give any of them up, and she hasn't. But she only does one at a time, so it's one thing and then another thing and then another thing, and she can go back to the first thing, as soon as it rotates back through.